Hi everyone, it's Paul at the Garland County Library, and I'm here once again with Jerry Butler of the Garland County Audubon Society. And he has another special event in his Bird and a Book program series. Today's bird of focus is the ivory-billed woodpecker. And in addition to Jerry, we have a very special guest who Mr. Butler here is going to introduce later to talk about a famous video clip involving the said bird, the ivory-billed woodpecker. But to start us off with, Mr. Butler is going to start us with a presentation about the bird. So I'm going to switch over to you. Welcome, Mr. Butler.
Hi, Paul. Good to be here again today. And it's good to be talking about another remarkable book and another remarkable bird. The Today's program is going to be a little bit different than the others. The others, we talked about the book first and then talked about the bird. But today we're going to be talking about the bird first, and then we'll be talking about the book. So let's get started, and we'll be talking about the Grail book, the Grail Bird. It's a book written by Tim Gallagher, and the subtitle is Hot on the Trail of the Ivory-billed Woodpecker. And this is the third program in our series. Those of you who have seen the others remember that we've already talked about The Birds of America by James Audubon, and then we did a special program too on the birds in the Bible. And so we'll talk about, as I said, the bird. The bird is the ivory-billed woodpecker. This is a painting that James Audubon did. James Audubon came to Arkansas in the 1820s, and over near the Mississippi River and up the Arkansas River, he reported that the ivory bills were more plenty. That meant that there were a lot of ivory bills in that part of Arkansas back in Audubon's day. And the books we're going to be looking at is actually two. One of them is the Grail book, The Grail Bird by Tim Gallagher, and then we'll be looking at one for children's book called The Big Woods Bird by Terri Luneau. Just as the Holy Grail has long been a mythical symbol of the death and resurrection of Christ, so the ivory-billed woodpecker has become a symbol of extinction and survival of significant avian and animal species. The word for the bird might be interesting. Of course, the most common used phrase to describe the bird is the ivory-billed woodpecker, and as most birds that are recognized by ornithologists have a common name, they also have a scientific name. And the scientific name for this bird is the Camphilius principalis. And my friend Bill Shepard tells me that this scientific name, the first part of it, Camphilius, means lover of grubs, and principalis, the species name, is translated best as prince. So we might think of this bird as the prince of grub eaters, but in our book today, it frequently calls it the Grail Bird, and it goes by other names: the Lord God bird, the phantom of the forest, the ghost bird, a good God, and there are some other nicknames as well. And throughout this presentation on the screen, I'll be referring to the ivory-billed woodpecker as the IBWO. That is a little abbreviation that birders use to talk about other species. And so you'll know what that stands for. It's named for its nose. The ivory-billed woodpecker has a large chisel-shaped bill, and it's ivory when the bird is alive. And upon the death, the bill darkens to a grayish yellow color. Perhaps you've seen the ivory-billed woodpecker in specimens mounted in museums or other places like that. And the bill is never as white, they say, as when the bird is alive. And in some of these museums, they've painted it with fingernail polish or some other such kind of paint, and it doesn't look as natural as the bird might have looked in the wild. But the ivory bill is not easily noticed if you were to see the bird in the wild. There are other field markings, as we call it, that are more noticeable. Most noticeable is the large amount of white on the back of the wings, and its overall size is about 20 inches or 50 centimeters in wingspan. It has a tufted peak on the head. The male bird, that tuft is red, and the female, it's black. And the flight pattern is distinctive too. It has a distinctive beat of its wings that's not like other woodpeckers, nor is it like ducks or crows or other such birds. And it has a distinctive call, and we'll be hearing that later. Before deforestation and hunting began to shrink its range, the ivory-billed woodpecker could be seen all the way from eastern Texas to North Carolina and from southern Illinois down to Cuba. And usually this bird was found in the wooded forests along the rivers and streams from the coast till farther north. But the ivory-billed woodpeckers had a difficult struggle to survive in the company of human beings. Some American Indians gave the bird deity status, yet others killed the bird and used its decorations and its beaks as a currency. And there are reports that at least one ivory-billed woodpecker bill was traded for 3 hides of deer that were already made into buckskin. So you can see it was a valued commodity among the Indians. And then when the Europeans arrived in North America, many ivory bills were shot just as for sport or trophies to mount in one's den or as decoration, like deer heads or mallard ducks are sometimes today. And unfortunately, many were collected by museums and public institutions, often to excess. One institution, the Harvard Museum of Comparative Anatomy, holds more than 60 such specimens, and they keep them preserved in drawers so scientists can look at them. And I tried to find out how many ivory bills were in the Smithsonian Institute, but they seem to be reluctant to tell me and give me that number. That makes me think that it may be even more than 60. Yet the greatest killer of ivory-billed woodpeckers has been the way that we have destroyed their habitat. From the earliest years when the Europeans came to this country, they began removing and chopping down trees, first using oxen and the backs of men with axes. But today, with modern machineries and bulldozers, they strip the land clear, and the ivory bill has nowhere to live. And as a result of all this deforestation, 85% of the habitat has been destroyed, and the 15% that remains has been sectioned off into small parcels. And thus, it's not as good for ivory bills, nor is it good for the other wild creatures and wildlife that depend on similar habitat. By 1930, ornithologists feared that the ivory-billed woodpecker might be extinct. And so there was an expedition that was sent to Louisiana to a tract of land that was actually owned by the famous Singer sewing machine company. It's called a Singer tract. And Jim Tanner did some research, and he found some ivory-billed woodpeckers, and he spent a good deal of time documenting their presence and their activities, and he's written a book about the ivory bill, and I like to think of it as the Old Testament in terms of its description of what we know about the ivory-billed woodpecker. And today's book you might think of as the New Testament on the ivory-billed woodpecker. For more than 50 years, the bird was considered probably extinct, as it was in Peterson's Field Guide. And the more recent and popular Sibley Guide to Birds does not even mention the ivory-billed woodpecker. In the 50-year interval between the time that that Tanner saw the bird in Louisiana and 2003, there was controversy about whether the bird was extinct or whether it was still living. And part of that controversy came about because there's another bird, the pileated woodpecker, that highly resembles the IBWO. But there are some differences. This slide shows you some of those differences. Notice that the ivory bill is larger. It has a larger beak. It's white as opposed to dark. The face of the pileated woodpecker has a good deal of white on it, but the ivory bill has little. And then, of course, there's that signature white back on its wings when it's folded. And then in flight, you can tell the difference too. You can see the large patch of white on the back of the wings when it's in flight. And on the pileated, the white is only on the leading edge of the wings. A man who lives here in Garland County prompted birding experts to reconsider the notion about whether the ivory bill was probably extinct. And that man is Gene Sparling. Gene Sparling was a kayaker who was traveling through East Arkansas on the White River Basin, and he saw a bird that fit the ivory bill's description. He got a close-up look at it, and he reported it on a website. And at this time, I'm going to ask Paul if he would to show us a video that deals with Gene Sparling that he made in 2005. This clip was aired on Sunday morning. That's CBS's program that airs each Sunday morning at 9 o'clock. Paul?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I think we should hear that other. It's the next video we need to see.
Um, is that not the right one?
No, that's the wrong one.
Let's see here. Might need you to stall for just a moment while I get that pulled up.
Okay. Well, that's probably my error. I may have skipped over that slide. The slide that you were listening to was a soundtrack of the Ivory-billed Woodpecker, and it's accompanied by some footage that Jim Tanner took back in the 30s. And I believe later in the program, our guest will show us a segment of that. Probably it would have been a repeat, even had Paul been able to show that. Today, this man, Gene Sparling, is no longer engaged in searching for the ivory-billed woodpecker. He's an artist who makes wooden shapes and sells them in art galleries. And I had asked him if he would be in our program today, and he declined. About 5 years ago, I'm a freelance writer, and I had interviewed him and published an interview of him in Birdwatcher's Digest. And even at that time, he had sort of drawn away from the ivory-billed search. And he says he has found talking about it tiresome. But he's a wonderful person, and he's still interested in birding, and he's still interested in protecting the environment and engaged in doing that. Are we ready to go now, Paul?
Yes, and I do have this clip from the 2005 CBS video.
Okay, well, let's see it then.
February of 2004, Gene started the whole ivory-bill craze by seeing it first.
I had set my paddle down, and the bird dropped in from above the canopy into the channel, headed straight towards me.
Gene's only regret is that he was sitting on his camera at the time.
So now the last thing is to get that good, crisp picture.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
What's going to happen for the person who gets that picture? More fame and fortune? Girls? Maybe the first time a birder got girls.
I can attest to that, actually.
I knew it was a big deal, but I really didn't know how big.
Bring on the groupies.
Until right at that moment, when a strange noise echoed through the woods. The distinct call
Hello?
of the cell phone in Gene's pocket.
Oh, no. Well, that's Tim Barksdale.
Most people thought if anyone was going to get the shot, it would be professional bird photographer Tim Barksdale. But he's been at it for quite a while. For how long?
I spent 241 days out here in the swamps.
And you didn't get a picture?
No.
So this is a little harder than I thought, maybe.
This is quite a bit harder than what we all thought.
What do you think the odds of me going out here for a couple hours and getting a picture?
Well, I'd say about 1,000,000 to 1.
1,000,000 to 1?
Yeah. Maybe 2,000,000 to 1.
Really?
Yeah, maybe 10,000,000 to 1. I don't know.
If I went out there and got a picture.
I'd slap you.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Yeah. How could I resist the challenge?
That bird could be here. That bird could be here. He could be over here.
Finding the right guide is crucial.
I can't for sure tell you where that bird is.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife Manager Dennis Widener is in charge of the refuge where the bird was found. And over the next 4 hours, he would lead me deep into one of America's wildest places.
Amazon of North America.
They really are frighteningly similar.
Well, you can see the kind of places that they were looking for the ivory-billed woodpecker, and is a daunting task indeed. That Gene had seen the first one was a remarkable thing, and when he reported it, of course, it brought attention to Arkansas and to birding in general. But there was another Arkansas who added evidence for what Sparling had cited. Now, I know that some of you have read already the Grail book and are just tuning in to hear us talk about this, but this other person was David Luneau, and the author of our book for today said that David Luneau was one of the first to show up, and Bobby ran into him 3 or 4 days after our sighting. Then he adds, I had taken an instant liking to him as though we were old friends. He seemed to be a good-natured and easygoing, infectious sense of optimism. From the start, as a member of the Ivory-billed search team at the Pearl River, David was the one who was most confident that the ivory-bill still lived. That's sort of my assessment of this person. And so now I'd like to introduce you to my friend and David Luneau, and he's going to tell us his story in his words.
Thank you, Jerry. Appreciate the kind introduction there, and Tim too, I suppose. I'm going to share a little slideshow with you that has some pictures and some videos, and I'll talk through it. But I just want to say, basically, in this 1 hour, it's hard to get through all the history of this bird. It's got such a rich, long history. We jumped from 1935 up to the current day. I'm going to fill in a few of those gaps, but it's still going to be there's still going to be a lot of probably a lot of questions in your mind, and a book. If you read through something like the Grail Bird, you'll get a deeper sense of the history of this bird and people looking for this bird. So hold on just 1 second while I share my screen with you.
I might say that there will be a time for questions later on from David, and I'll be asking some, and the audience may as well.
Okay, so I've just titled this little part of the presentation, A Bird of the Big Woods. We call the big woods of eastern Arkansas the Big Woods. I think it was actually Faulkner who coined that term many, many years ago. Jerry showed you pictures of specimens. Well, I was at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology at one point during this search, and I found ivory-bills there. I found specimens of ivory-bills there, and I've got them holding them next to John James Audubon's famous painting of ivory-bills. And one thing to note there is that Audubon painted these birds life-size. So if you ever do see an Audubon painting of the ivory-bills and many of his other birds, he painted them actual life-size, and he did it unfortunately from formerly live specimens. So he, in addition to other collectors, did collect, as we say, some of these birds. Jerry pointed out the differences, the visual differences. If you were lucky enough to see these birds perched on a tree, it'd be a snap to see that the one with the big white on the back is the ivory-bill. If it's all black on the back, which you're much more likely to see, that's the more common pileated or pileated woodpecker. But they also, as with most birds and most birders, the sound is what we listen for, because you may not realize this if you aren't a serious birder, but you hear birds a lot more often and a lot easier than you can actually see them. So I'm going to play you some calls here of the two different birds, and the first one is from the pileated, and it will, if you've been out in the woods in Arkansas or even maybe in your own backyard, you may well have heard this call. The ivory-bill has been described as sounding like a clarinet or a child's toy tin trumpet. See what you think about it. And I'll talk a little more in a minute about how those sounds, how and when and where those sounds were recorded. Jerry's already told you the where part in Louisiana. Also, signals that woodpeckers give are different. They bang on trees for a couple of reasons. One of which is signaling to other woodpeckers that this is their territory. So first, affiliated. It's more of a traditional woodpecker drumming sound. Ivory-bills and other members of its genus Campephalus do, or most of the members of that genus do what's called a double knock. Their signal is a ba-bam. And so we're out in the woods listening for not just the calls of the woodpecker, but also if you hear a double knock, that might be worth pursuing where that double knock came from. And that actually, there is actually no known recording of the ivory-billed double knock. That's a similar species that I played you there. So how did they get this? Well, here's some of the equipment they used. I like to call this a 1935 iPod. That's Paul Kellogg from Cornell University, who was part of the expedition that was led by Arthur Allen of Cornell University to the Singer Tract in northeastern Louisiana in 1935. And Tanner spent a couple more years there working on his PhD thesis and wrote the book that Jerry talked about, which was his PhD thesis. But they recorded these sounds. They actually found an ivory-billed nest. They built a blind in a tree nearby and got the footage that I'm going to show you here in a minute that you saw a little bit of on Jerry's recording as well. They had state-of-the-art film equipment at the time in the 1930s, but it was silent movie shooting equipment, and it was black and white. They recorded the sounds separately. So the video I'll show you in a minute has, I actually went through using modern video and audio processing tools, synced up some of the sounds with the video to make it look and feel realistic. So take a look at this and see what you think. That's the male. Even though it's black and white, you can see the reddish on his head. It's gray here. You can see how bright ivory colored the bill is. And remember that wing beat sound you just heard. We're going to talk about that a little bit later as the bird flew off. This was a nest exchange. That's the female. She's got a solid black crest. So that's some of the only films ever made of an ivory-billed woodpecker. They were made on a Cornell expedition in 1935 into Louisiana. And after Tanner's studies there in the early 40s, there was what was thought to be the last reliable sighting in that area. And then the question became, did the bird go extinct? Well, between the early 1940s and today, there have been sightings and evidence here and there on and off. One of the more compelling pieces of evidence was this photo that Fielding Lewis took in South Louisiana in May of 1971. And if you look close enough at the screen, right on the tree there, right in the middle of, almost in the middle of the picture, a little off to the right, you see what's clearly an ivory-billed woodpecker. The only question was it really an ivory-billed woodpecker, or was it a decoy in somebody's version of a hoax? So that's the only, the naysayers who want to say that that's not an ivory-billed woodpecker, about all they could say about that was somebody climbed up that tree and hung a decoy up there. And then he took a picture of it, which he, of course, scoffed at that idea. Yeah, Fielding Lewis was a very, very large man, and he didn't go about climbing trees in the swamp. So that's one compelling piece of evidence. Moving forward here and skipping some other pieces of evidence, we'll go into what I call the modern era. The gentleman on the left there is David Cullivan in April of 1999 in the Pearl River Wildlife Management Area in Louisiana. he was turkey hunting, dressed in full camo, sitting beneath a tree, and claims that a pair of ivory bills came up to a tree very close to him, and he got a 5 to 10 minute look at them as they played around on the tree, unaware of his presence there. He was afraid to get to his camera because he knew if he moved, he would scare him off. So once again, we have a sighting with no picture. And that was kept secret for a better part of a year. And I found out about it in early 2000. And my brother and I traveled down to the Pearl River area on several occasions, hoping to find it down there, because this bird is at this point thought to be extinct. There may be a few left in Cuba, is what the thought was at that time. And so this was an opportunity within striking distance of Arkansas to go find one of the world's rarest birds. It caught the attention of the Zeiss Optics Company, and they sponsored a search in early 2002, and 6 of us were selected to participate in that search. It was 30 days in the swamp in the Pearl River Wildlife Management Area. That's me, 4th from the left, 3rd from the right, in my younger days, sponsored by Zeiss. Zeiss Optics, they gave us all binoculars to use and place to stay and so on. And we looked for 30 days, found a few interesting things, no ivory bills, maybe some signs of ivory bills, but that's, who knows. Those are signs. I'll talk a little bit about some signs in a minute. But I came back from that search still pumped up about finding ivory bills, and so I led my own searches here in Arkansas in 2003. I just got a group of volunteers. A lot of people had contacted me after the Zeiss search and said they wanted to go looking. So I put together a group of 7 or 8 people who had expressed an interest in it. We went down to the White River Refuge in southeast Arkansas, which one person has dubbed the cul-de-sac of Arkansas. If you go drive down into the White River Refuge, there's one road in and one road back out. So it's sort of a dead end. It's got a lot of big old growth trees in places there. And we looked long and hard there. Found some very large trees, found some holes. There are black bears that hang out in that area, so I don't recommend crawling into any of those holes, although a couple of the guys did. Some signs, we mentioned signs of ivory bills. They have a big, powerful bill, and they were known to chisel trees looking for grubs because, as Jerry pointed out, they're lovers of grubs. It's their main food source. And so they can drill into a tree, and they're especially famous for stripping bark off a tree, much as this one. Finding a tree like this with stripped bark gave us a lot of hope that we would find an ivory bill coming back to this tree. And that tree right there, I believe, was the first tree I set up a game camera on. And in 2003, game cameras were just starting to begin the transition from being film cameras to being digital cameras. They were fairly rare and pretty expensive then. I mean, nowadays you can go get a nice game camera for under $100 that connects to the internet or the cell phone service or whatever. But in those days, it was much more of a daunting challenge to put game cameras out. But we did. And then the next year, very, very shortly, or I guess it was just the next year after I'd done the searching in South Arkansas, Gene Sparling, you just heard his story. On February 11th of 2004, as he described, he was paddling down and just leaned back to enjoy the moment when he saw the ivory bill. And again, another sighting and no camera within reach because he wasn't there looking for ivory bills. He was just out canoeing through the big woods and enjoying the scenery. He reluctantly posted his sighting on the Canoe Club website, where word got out, and it eventually came to me, and I, as Tim pointed out, was out there within a few days of their sighting. Actually, the word from Gene's sighting got to Tim before I heard about it, and Tim called his friend Bobby, and they met Gene over in the swamp about 2 weeks after his sighting. And they both had a sighting as well. They both saw a bird at the same time, and they both drew pictures of it because, again, they didn't have cameras at the ready. And we all think the bird's gonna perch and we're gonna have time to set up a nice photo shoot, but it hasn't happened that way because it's apparently a very skittish bird, and we only have some fleeting sightings of it. So I mentioned game cameras. There's one of the early ones we use strapped to a tree there, and you see a couple things in this picture. One is the game camera. We ended up with 8 of them, and I put those out in different places throughout the swamp and along Bayou de View in eastern Arkansas. But you also see on the right side of that picture a Canon GL2 video camera, a digital video camera. It was a nice, high quality, state of the art camera, not waterproof, by the way. But I decided that with the numbers of sightings we had over the years, and even early on in this search, there were a few sightings, but everyone that sighted it was a bird watcher, and the first thing bird watchers do when they see something is put binoculars on it. But a bird this rare, I realized that you needed to put a camera on it because nobody really cares if you said you saw an ivory bill. Everybody wants to see your picture or your video of the ivory bill. So I would leave my camera running the entire time I was out there, and this, of course, was the days of digital videotape, and it had an hour's time, so I would record for an hour. If I didn't see anything, I would just rewind it and record over it. And so I just had to have enough batteries to keep the camera going the whole time I was out there. There's the setup. That's pretty much what I was using in the day I got a video, April 25th of 2004. Had my camera sitting on a cushion just above the gunnel of the boat. Had a trolling motor to not just because I'm lazy, but also because you can go through the swamp a lot quieter with less motion and more hands-free if you have a trolling motor pushing the canoe along. So I was with my brother-in-law, Robert, and we had been checking cameras all day on that day. It was a cool, rainy day, a sprinkly kind of day anyway. And we were just coming up, it was 3:40 in the afternoon, and we were coming up on our 8th camera that we were going to check. And I'll roll the video here. That's Robert. Unfortunately, the camera was aimed straight at Robert. I usually cocked it off to the left or the right, but unfortunately that day it was focused 6 feet away on Robert. But as I roll this video, I want you to watch above the handle of the paddle, the bright yellow paddle, which I eventually got rid of and replaced with more subtle colors. But keep an eye above the handle. Yeah, that's because I put my other camera out here one time. See? That was it. That was our glimpse. I'll give you a second chance here. Watch above the handle of the paddle. See? Robert did eventually answer my question about did you see it? He said, yeah, I'd like to see it again, because we just saw it for a few seconds, a fleeting glimpse. We listened for a while. Didn't ever hear anything. You know, a lot of times the pileated will fly off and go land in a tree and let out those loud sounds I played for you earlier. Never heard anything. So after a while, we were assumed the bird was long gone. So I stopped the camera, rewound a little ways, played it, and I could see it in the little monitor. And I thought, oh boy, we're going to take this home and put it on the big screen TV and see it in all its glory. Well, it didn't happen that way either, because it was just a small bird in the corner of the image. So we did a little enhancement to the video. What you're going to see here is, I think it's 4 times slowed down, and I forget how many, 8 times zoom maybe. But anyway, you'll be able to see above the handle of the paddle a lot easier here. So zooming in does help. You see an awful lot of white on the bird. Various other subtle things. We did a lot with this video. Eventually, at first, we just looked at it and said, it could be not. But it's possible evidence. We'll start us a big search. We had a big search that was in 2004. So between 2004 to about a year later in 2005. we did a lot of searching. And one of the things you search for, not just the bird, but where the bird roosts or nests. And so we did a lot of looking in trees for woodpecker cavities. This gene holding that sheet there, the two on the left, the rounder ones, and as well as the real one there in the tree, are pileated cavities. They're rounder and smaller. The three on the right are actual shapes of ivory-billed cavities from historical data. There's actually that tree you saw in the film that the Cornell people took. Actually, when the nest failed, they cut that tree down and took it back to Cornell with them, and it's still there. And one of those holes is the one that was in that tree they have. Over the next year, it was very secretive. We hired a group of mostly young people, not exclusively young people, but they were ornithologists and biologists and bird people of various sorts. And over that time, we had 18 sightings by 16 different people. But again, they were sightings. No one was quick enough on the camera to get a picture of it. But we had some good sightings, and then they would be interviewed, and their interviews were recorded, and they were grilled on what they had seen and asked lots of questions. We kept it a secret for almost a year. We were just about ready to make our big announcement. We were working on a paper, publish a paper in Science, and the story broke. It got away from us, got out in the news. But we did eventually, or not eventually, but shortly after that, June 3rd of 2005, published a paper in Science. It became the cover story in Science magazine, Science Journal, which was a really big deal. The editor of the magazine wrote an editorial piece on it, and life was good. We did a lot of presentations that first year, explaining to people what we had, what evidence we had. We poured through the video. I won't go into all the details, but one of the things I mentioned earlier that we did not put in the Science paper because we didn't have enough information at the time was that wing beat rate. We listened to that video, and you can count in time how fast the wings beat. And it turns out the ivory-bill beats its wings faster than the smaller pileated because of the way it beats its wings. And the bird leaving the nest that Cornell videoed, the wing beat rate matched almost perfectly with the one in my video, whereas every pileated video we had, in counting wing beats, they were significantly slower. There was virtually no evidence we had that a pileated ever flapped as fast as the one in the video or the one in the Cornell film. And it made a big sensation, made a big splash, not just in the scientific world, but Arkansas has an ivory-billed woodpecker license plate. That's one of mine. I have a couple of them. We did a lot of presentations the first year. Went to a lot of Audubon groups and garden groups and scientific groups and so on. And as Jerry mentioned earlier, my wife wrote a book too. She had actually written this before the announcement. She always likes to write some poetry, so she wrote a children's poetry book about Bigwood's bird. And the Butler Center of the Central Arkansas Library System named it as their first For Arkansas book. And we did a lot of school visits to get kids interested in nature. Showing them what's out in the woods. The book shows various animals you would encounter if you spent a day. Various animals we did encounter actually spending a day out in the swamp, in the swamps of eastern Arkansas. So it was a good educational thing for school kids, and we have, if anyone's interested in doing educational work with children, contact us about some books, and we can help you out with that for sure. And finally, I'll just close by saying we need to save a place for the ivory-billed woodpecker. As Jerry mentioned, also the habitat destruction is a significant problem for the ivory-billed. This is actually in eastern Arkansas, and there are still some old cypress trees there and some old tupelo trees there. And when they're gone, they're gone. And it takes a long time to make a 1,000-year-old tree, about 1,000 years. So we try to work with the Nature Conservancy and other groups to conserve the old growth swamps that we still have left. And with that, I think I will turn it back over to Jerry, or handle any questions anybody might have, Jerry or Paul or anyone else.
Okay. Thank you, David. That was a wonderful statement. I do have some questions for Gene. For David.
Okay.
David, you alluded when you were making your comments about the fact that the word got out about the bird after y'all's hunt in 2005, and this book was published about that time. Do you think it was appropriate to release the information then, or do you think its whereabouts should have been kept secret?
Oh, I don't think the book had anything to do with the secret getting out. We had a fairly close. It started with just a few people: Gene, Tim, Bobby, and Scott Simon at the Nature Conservancy, and a few people, including the director of the Cornell Lab, John Fitzpatrick, and a few of us local people. And we decided, who else we needed. We let people in if we thought they were going to be able to help us with the search or help us with some logistics or help us with funding. And we kept that a close-knit group. Anybody we let in, we would basically swear them to secrecy. And the group eventually got larger and larger. We were managing maybe as many, just round numbers, maybe as many as 100 people knew about it, but were sworn to secrecy. Well, somewhere along the way, something got out. And when it did, it went viral, as you'd say. Now, I don't think something going viral was an expression in 2005, but it truly went viral just within a couple hours. And chat rooms and emails and all blew up. And there was some overreaction about nobody should know where the location is and so on and so forth. Well, we'd had a lot of people looking for a year, and we still hadn't found where the bird roosted or nested or whether there was more than one. So, and the Big Woods are a big place for the Cache River and White River National Wildlife Refuges. So I personally wasn't too worried about it. I would have been more concerned about giving the location away had we actually found a roost hole or a nest hole. Then it becomes a little more critical and more sensitive. But we could never pin the bird down to any one location, so I wasn't too concerned about that.
A lot of the people here in Garland County know Dr. John Simpson, and he sits on the library board now. Do you recall his role in it and his assistance?
I left his name out of there, but shame on me, because he was one of the first people Gene Sparling went to, because he's a big nature conservator. He was on the Nature Conservancy board, and Gene's main goal throughout this whole thing was not fame or notoriety. It was not rediscovering a lost species. His was all about he was always all about the habitat and protecting the habitat, protecting the lands. That's why he was over there in the first place, was just to see the beauty of that area. And he knew somebody at the Nature Conservancy could help, and he knew John Simpson. So John was involved. I went out in the swamp a couple of times with John.
I asked John to be on the show, and he declined in favor of you, probably because he didn't want you to tell that story about him falling out. One other thing is, since that time, in 2005, there have been a couple of other things. Could you kind of thumbnail give us some reports of things that have happened since 2005?
Yeah, we searched on, officially in an organized fashion for the next probably 3 years or so, and then that kind of tapered off. There's still a few individuals, I understand, searching here in Arkansas. There are groups in 3 places that I know of that have been doing searching. A group from Auburn University searching in the Florida Panhandle claimed quite a few sightings along the Apalachicola River. I've never been down there and was not part of that search, but they had some very intriguing evidence and a lot of sightings there. Another individual working in the Pearl River Wildlife Management Area Michael Collins had a number of sightings and a number of intriguing videos. None any better than what I had, really, in my opinion. But the same kind of analysis. I mean, we're still awaiting that glossy National Geographic cover picture that has escaped us so far. And the third group in central Louisiana has some interesting, or at least one interesting game camera photo, and a number of sightings there as well. So, and I get reports on a sporadic basis. Just had one about 2 or 3 weeks ago from a gentleman in I think it was eastern Alabama, in an area I'm not familiar with. But his sighting was many years ago, or at least a few years back, and he's about to retire and plans to go looking in that area. And I think that's what it's going to take, is a few dedicated people to look in promising high quality areas before we can maybe find a handful of these birds and nudge them along back to larger numbers.
Although we're really searching for a good picture and everything, even if we get good photographs and all, until we find a nesting pair, and it's just a picture. A picture really isn't in the end of the search, is it?
No, a picture may get you some attention to that area to protect it, or to buy up more habitat. That's what the Nature Conservancy, and to some extent the federal government with wildlife refuges, goes about doing, is expanding good areas, important birding areas, things like that. So that would be the benefit of having a good picture or a good video, is to confirm to these groups that they're really out there and that land needs to be protected.
And I know information is hard to come by from Cuba, but what stock do you put in the reports that we've had from Cuba? They
were back, I want to say, in the early 80s, maybe. It was many years ago. And my understanding from a friend of mine who's been down there, Mark John Lamertink, he's been down there once, if not twice, that the habitat is just not good anymore at all. And if there were some there then, he was very skeptical that there would still be any there.
Okay. Paul, I don't know whether we've had questions from others, or maybe from your staff or whatever. Is something you'd like to ask?
Yes, I have a handful of questions. I did want to give a shout out to Mary Ann in the comments, who said it's an excellent presentation, and I agree. And then she asked, have you tried making and putting out bird dough for them to come to and eat?
I guess that was for me. Bird dough as in suet. Tim Barksdale, the white bearded fellow that they were talking about with the giant camera, who spent 241 days in the swamp, and I told him one time I saw some needle-nosed gars there where he had built his blind. He said, yeah, there's 17 of them. So, he spent a long time out there by himself counting fish and looking for birds. But he put up some suet feeders out there, hoping to attract the woodpeckers. And he attracted birds and woodpeckers, just not the right one.
Question for you, David, and Jerry, you might want to chime in as well. Do you think the fervor for birders behind the hunt for the ivory-billed woodpecker is all about the bird itself, or is the appeal something even more grander than that?
Well, I'll try it first, and then Jerry can fill in with the right answers. But I think for true birders, birders by and large, just to put a blanket over all of us, like lists, and we like to see how many birds we've seen in Arkansas, what our life list is, that sort of thing. And this is truly the holy grail of birds of North America. There's only a few birds in North America that are considered as rare or as extinct, depending on how you look at it, as the ivory-bill. So getting this on your bird list would be a great thing for a birder. But even beyond that, with birders, I think most of us would just like to know that the bird's out there and still exists, and would like to do what we can on a grander scale, which is protect the habitat. So, because we can't make them reproduce, but we can give them a place to do it.
I believe David's right that the birders want that. But, when I first heard about the ivory-billed woodpecker, I was not a birder. I was a fisherman. And I like to go down to the White River and go fishing. And a friend of mine who was an international bird photographer, he had heard about it on the news, and he called me and asked if I'd go down there to watch and look for the ivory-billed. And I said, I know nothing about birds, but I know the White River. And so I took him down there and we began to look for birds. And I became so intrigued with his looking at birds and telling me about birds that I've just given up my fishing pole and spent all my tackle money on binoculars. And for me, it was more than just the ivory-billed woodpecker. It turned me on to the importance. And when a person becomes a birder, it's not long after they become a birder that they'll begin to realize the importance of insects and the importance of trees and the importance of nature, and to take a bigger view of the world. So I don't think another bird that beside the ivory-billed woodpecker would have intrigued me like it was.
What importance does the search for the ivory-billed have to the scientific community? For either one of you.
Well, I would say that the scientific community is very anxious to know. But in some responses, I think the scientific community hasn't looked at the data. I think in some instances, they haven't considered the information that David and his film and his group showed us about the wing beats. And they sort of passed it off as to give a psychological explanation. They give us psychological explanations. Well, they want to see a bird, so they see it. Or they say, there's confusion. But they give no documentation that, in fact, that's what happened. In some instances, I'm sure that's what happened. And so my personal opinion is the scientific community has not been very scientific in looking at the data. I don't know whether David agrees with that, but that's what I think.
Well, I'd say it's like so much other stuff these days, everything's polarized. We had a very, very large group of very highly trained scientists, and I'm not one of those, by the way. I'm an engineer. I just happen to be a birder on the side. But most of the people out there were bird experts and woodpecker experts who saw this bird. And I know some of the birders in Arkansas still point to that as being the most significant fact we had, is that we had so many people. You can't have that many people who are expert birders say they saw it and then just brush that off. But as far as the importance to the scientific community of the bird, it's like any of these other ghost species or crypto species that people thought were extinct, or in some cases never knew if they really existed or not, show up. I think it gives us a little hope that somewhere out there, there might be something we haven't discovered yet. There might be hope that there's a small number of these birds still alive, and if so, they've made it through this bottleneck from the 30s all the way up. I mean, we're coming up on 85, 90 years since there was just one small population of them really studying. So I think it's a message of hope that these things may have survived, albeit in small numbers, for all this time.
David, do you think there's a point where people should consider all hope lost for the search? It's a waste of time, or do you think it's worth pursuing as long as there's interest?
I think each person has to make their own decision about that. But for me, I'm not searching as much now, just different station in life and time to spend and so forth. But I think and hope that people are out there searching. I hope people will go out there who are interested in this bird and search for it. I don't, and people on a regular basis tell me they found it. I haven't seen that glossy photo yet that would say, oh yeah, you've seen it. But I get some pretty good reports, and I get some pretty not so good reports. But I think it's worth the search, because if it disappeared for 30, 40, 50 years, it's really only been 15 years since we saw it. So that's not a very long time in the lifespan of one of these things.
Mary Ann says, I've looked for them since 72. Keep looking.
There you go.
I'd like to mention something here. In the advertising of this program, a man up in Iowa saw the ads for this program, and he's contacted me by email and by phone, and he told me that he was a wood carver who has placed carvings of extinct birds in several museums all across our nation. And he is sending me one of his carvings of the ivory-billed woodpecker. And I was hoping it would arrive by today and I could show it to you on this program. But he called me just as I walked in the library and apologized that he couldn't get it here, but it should arrive tomorrow. And I'm going to bring that carving to the library. And if you're in Garland County, you can come and see that carving and get a feel for the size and the shape and look of the ivory bill. And I would encourage people nearby to do that. Of course, our audience is much wider today than Garland County. And before David leaves, I want to ask him here in front of this large audience, David, are you going to take me out into the big woods next fall and show me a little bit, and let's get a little sample of the look for the ivory bill?
I would love to do that. In fact, it's been a few years since I've been back to the video site. I still have my same old GPS receiver with that waypoint in it, and we can, if I don't remember where it is, which I think I do, I can should be able to paddle us right to that spot, and we can have a look-see there. Of course, it could be anywhere, but it's nice to go back out there. It's a beautiful place, and you don't really think of swamps in eastern Arkansas as being a beautiful place, but you spend one day out there and you'll probably change your mind.
Well, next year when the leaves get off the trees, you can rest assured that that's what these two guys are going to be trying to do. I guess we'll go back to our PowerPoint, unless you have something else, Paul.
Just a few more questions. David, out of all the modern evidence, including your own, what do you think is the most compelling proof that the woodpecker might still be out there?
I think the compelling proof is the numbers of people that saw it. I mean, we had, as I said, 18 sightings by 16 people. That was just in the 1 year period when I first put that slide together. We had sporadic sightings, although they seem to have tapered off after that time. But we had, mostly because the numbers of people tapered off as well. But we had a lot of sightings. I mean, we've got various pieces of video evidence and photo evidence that people can sit and argue about all day. But and I guess you can argue about whether somebody really saw it or not as well. But for me, I think so many people saw the bird. I think you got to refute them one by one, and that's pretty tough to do.
Got a question from Brianna who says, are there any species that have a symbiotic relationship to the ivory bill that could be an indicator for good habitat?
Not particularly, I don't think. I mean, the pileated is kind of overlaps range a lot, but they different food sources. Some overlap there too, I think. But I know at one point a guy from Arkansas State University was studying pileated as sort of a surrogate for ivory bills, figuring if we learned everything about the pileated, we might know the limit of what they do, so that if we see something different than that, we could infer it's an ivory bill. But that's tough to do.
And someone said, if you do tours, sign me up. And then last, not more of a comment, I'll end with, in preparing for this, I read an article from Ken Kaufman on the Audubon website, and a quote on there stood out to me on a article about the woodpecker. He said, "My head says that the species is extinct, but my heart won't accept that."
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair quote for a lot of people. I mean, everybody I don't think anybody in the birding community or conservation world wants it to be extinct. But you got to, and it really doesn't matter what we think. We should be conserving the land regardless of whether the ivory-bill's out there or not, because it's obviously not the only species in the woods that benefits from having old growth forests.
I might comment on that Ken Kaufman quotation. Ken Kaufman is a very good writer and is well known in birding circles. A few years ago, he wrote a piece about his mother. His mother is the one who turned him on to birding, and he left his home, I think it was in Kansas, as a young man, and he never got back. And his mother would call him sometime and saying, Ken, I'm seeing some chickadees in the trees behind my house. And Ken said, no, Mother, said, you won't see chickadees in your backyard. They're not there, and those trees behind your yard are not big. And then a few years later, his mother would write him again, Mama, there's chickadees here. And every time he would argue as to why that chickadee could not be in her backyard in the flat lands of out in Kansas. And then several years later, when his mother was very ill, he went to see her. And in fact, the trees had grown up in their backyard, and there were a lot of chickadees in her backyard. So I wonder if our friend Ken Kaufman will think about that.
All right, Jerry, I know you have just a couple more slides to show, and then after that, I'll give you both an opportunity to give your final remarks tonight.
Okay.
So tell me when you're ready to put your slides back up.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right.
I want us to comment a little bit about what's next on the Book and the Bird series. Our next book is going to be The Big Year, and you can read that book or you can watch the film. They're available online, or you can check them out here at the library. And unlike the other books we've been having, it'd be a good idea if our audience could check that book out and read it. It's a wonderful read. It has a lot of humor in it, and the movie is a pretty good representation of the book. Although I read the book first and then saw the movie, and I like that order. Either one would be good for you. And then we'll do at least one more after that. And these are some of the books that have been suggested. You might want to look at that list there, and if there's one of those books you would like to see us consider and review, then we'll choose whatever our audience seems to recommend. And then if there's another book that you would like to suggest, why, please suggest that title as well. And if we do some of those books, it's not like this Ivory-billed Woodpecker book. Most of those books allow us to look, and if you would like to know more about cranes or bobolinks or doves or eagles, maybe we could take a closer look at those birds. And so till we meet again to talk about books and birds from the Garland County Library and the Audubon Society, I'm your host, Jerry Butler, wishing you peace and enjoyable birding and good breeding. But maybe now we'll go back to some comments or end up for Paul.
That's all I have on this end, but if either one of you would like to make some final remarks before we say goodbye. Oh, one last thing before you do. For the viewers, this is recorded, so as soon as it's over, both on the library's Facebook page and YouTube channel, if you'd like to share this or go back and rewatch it if you turn in late, then that's available indefinitely on both the library's Facebook and YouTube channels.
Okay. Well, I think that about does it for me, Paul. Thank you for your help. Thank you, David, for helping us out on A Book and a Bird.
thank you for inviting me, and thank you for picking an interesting topic, one that's near and dear to my heart. And I was proud to be a part of this presentation. Thanks to Paul for putting it on, and Jerry for putting it together.
Okay. Good day.
Thank both of you. Thank everyone for watching.